Good morning, Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1428. So yesterday I gave somewhat of an overview of what the Tiferes are in the context of the divine, which on his own, God is omnipotent and beyond definitions and beyond Midos. Remember, we learned also Midos is not just emotions and attributes, also from the word midah, measure, definition. Beyond all that, and yet he created an existence that is defined by measure and parameters, and including the faculties of a human being. And Chesed, in contrast to the Chachmei HaMechkar, insists that the Midos are also above. There are actually spheres that are Midos. So all of that, how do you reconcile? So therefore, we understand that there's the interface, so to speak, that God manifested. Like he said, that it's atzmim, it's not midos, it's not attributes like human that are affected by each other, by us interacting with each other, but they're using the words that he used here, that he said like this, that midos l'maylehin atzmim, loisha mispalim min azulos, line 3 on page 1428, hainu min avram kim shem mitzad ha'etzem, basically shleimus ha'atzmus, dictates that he has these capacities, and he's chosen with lamata to express himself through attributes. Goes through all the stages from the earliest stage where it's just the capacity, the potential, the sinasmokim, like we learned earlier on page where we spoke about the shemus on page 1420, till it actually becomes, after the Tzimtzum, actual attributes from which in turn will evolve the faculties of the human being, which are subject to Hispaalus and being affected by one another. So basically, we have the Midos, actual Midos Lamaila. Just for the record, I did find that the Rebbe Rashab already spoke about this earlier in Ayin Beis, and that goes back to page 298 in volume 1. I want to just read it because it can help us understand this a bit more. It's chapter 152 in volume 1. The page is Chotzer, 298. So I just want to read a few lines from there, because it's exactly the same idea. And he says like this. He says, I'm reading on page 298, volume 1, chapter 152. He says, that Lamaila, you don't have Midos, klal. That he Midos hein Hispaalus, because the Midos are Hispaalus, shemispol b'chesed u'kahai gavurah. Meaning the person is affected. Intellect, you could say, is detached, but Midos is like it's impacting us subjectively. It's our emotions, our feelings. Ulamaila ein shayich in Hispaalus. Hispaalus literally can mean excitement, but it could be stimulation. It could be change, it could be shift. Hispaalus has many meanings, as we shall discuss. That's why they say that Lamaila is only the pu'ula, the function of Chesed, the result, pu'ulas Chesed. God can do Chesed. Of course, you can do anything. But not, you can't attribute to God the attribute of Chesed. That's what they say. And the sources he actually cites here from the Meir Nevuchim and the Kuzri. So here's what he says there. This is why I'm adding it, because it adds a little addition to what we learned here. He says, Vihine, and now Hanochesh Alehem. Hanochesh Alehem means their axiom or their statement or their concept. Hanocha means their upleg, meaning their theory, if you wish.
Assessment.
It's true from one aspect. It's true. But from another angle, it's not true. Here, he actually said it's emes ene kain. He said ena emes kain. He said at the bottom of page 1427, ena emes kain. There, he says on one hand, there's something true about it, what they're saying, but mitzad sheni, he said mitzad echad eina emes. What is that? The zeh emes, what is true is shalamayla hamidus einam b'chinas Hispaalus. That the Maila Midas are not a form of excitability or shift or change as it affects us. Like, for example, a minute before we don't have love, then we're stimulated, and there's a stimulation as something that triggers or activates love. Like Lamala, you can't say Hispaalus like that. Ava Masha Koshav, Masha Eimnim, Shalo Yesh B'chinas Hamidas Lamayla. Raka Pu'ula, but to say that there are no actual attributes above, only pu'ula, only the function, ein ze emes. That's not true. The yesh midas lamayla, because there are midas above, midas ha-chesed, or midas ha-gevurah, ba'adara b'hein tamid, and on the contrary, they're not just temporary, they're actual midas all the time, b'b'chinas Hispaalus, in a state of revelation, lis chesed or lis rachem, to do kindness, to be compassionate. So there's an active midah above, even when they're not actually having a direct effect and impact. Because the very core midas, emotions above, are not due to Hispaalus azulas as they are below. That is azulas. That you want to do chesed, you see someone that needs chesed, you want to do kindness, so it's stimulated through another. That's not the case above. Ki'im mitzad shleimus ha'atzmus. The midas above are mitzad shleimus ha'atzmus. Essentially what he's saying here, but it's a little different language. Then he goes on to say that these midas ha'atzmim are mitzad ha'chochmeh. It's all achdus. And it's all connected with God. It's one with the Eibishter. He's one with his attributes, because his attributes are an extension of his abilities. That's basically back there, beginning of chapter 152, again, page 298. So just interesting to read it there, and the language there, very similar to the ideas here, but language is a bit different, but exactly the same concept. Okay. That's what he's established. So it's all coming from the God's faculties, all the way in the root, the power to radiate, Yecholte Lahoyer, Yecholte Shaloi Lahoyer, Rachmim Atzmim, and all this is from there originate. Ultimately, will come Mistayif Mimenu. He says it branches from there. From there will evolve. Will ultimately be established the Midos, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, and so on. That's what we summed up yesterday. I'm going to continue now. If somebody wants to ask anything? Okay. So I'm going to continue now, line 9, top of page 1428, the line that begins, Pnei Melachayim, and the pages, if you want to follow the text, is at ayinbeis.com. So now, as I set the stage yesterday, I said, so then we still have to understand, is there Hispaalus L'mayla? We established in the source for sure not. The source is just God in his shleimus, like he says, shleimus ha'atzmus, is ability, like the Avedis HaGadosh said, the ability to create bli gvul, ability to create gvul. In gvul itself, the ability to express chesed, gevurah, tiferes, etc. And these are the midas l'mayla in Atzilus. They're rooted in God's capacities. But now he's going to talk about Atzilus, where the spheres actually become tangible spheres. They're divine, but they are defined midas. So as I said, there's going to be the interface between God, not just that we now establish that God's midas are atzmim, and ours are Hispaalus. He's going to say there's also Hispaalus l'mayla on the level of Atzilus. So let's continue. We'll read inside. Midas k'moshe heim ba'Atzilus. Remember, the midas are rooted before the Tzimtzum all the way in God's capacity to radiate, to not radiate, to restrain, like we learned before. But then, after the Tzimtzum, remember, Eser Spheres Agnuzis, before we learned, they're not even actual spheres. They're just like names. You call someone, you call them. So it's like essentially potential archetypes, as we learned earlier. But then they become Esser Spheres Agluyas. After the Tzimtzum and the Kav, we know that the spheres will actually become spheres. Use the example I often give, the fetus, once a new fetus is conceived, it may be one cell, but it's a cell. And that cell does have in it and encompasses in it everything that will come from that cell as it splits and turns into a child, including all the faculties the child has. But how is it before the cell? Before it became a cell, so the neshama above, before it became connected to something physical, also has that capacity, but it's not yet in any tangible way. There's no seed yet. It's the concept of a seed, if you wish. Just giving as an example. So there's a state where the Esser spheres are not spheres. They're just God's envisioning them, as we learned. And even that, there's a level before he envisions them. Just his capacity to envision them, or his capacity to emanate. Like we learned earlier, all the levels, all the way back to Shmaya Atzmi, all the way back to the highest levels. But when they do come down into Atzilus, they have now Midos. They're now functioning Midos. And we learn not like the Chachmei HaMechkar, they're not just there, they're not just imaginary that are only there for the functionality as it relates to existence, they're actually Midos. Like he said before in volume 1, Midos all the time. There's a Chesed that's shining all the time. Then there are times when it functions, sometimes it doesn't function, just like a human being. We have Chesed in our faculties, even if you're not exercising it, meaning you're not actualizing, you're not doing Chesed right now, you have Chesed 24/7. Same thing Lamaila. There's a Chesed of Atzilus. There's Gevurah of Atzilus. There's Tiferes. Netzach, Ched, Yesod, Malchus. So he says, in Atzilus, which is not the root of the Midas as they are in the capacity of God, but he says, in Atzilus, Midas, Commission, Atzilus, Hein Bebchinas Hispaalus. They are in a state of Hispaalus, which means they are impacted by existence. Before we said God is Leisha Nisi, is not impacted. That's how it is before Atzilus. And there, the Midas are only simply God's capacities, God's abilities, as we learned. They said Atzmim, it's Ada Etzem. But in Atzilus, the Midas are already now engaging with and relating to existence. And this is where we're going to be going back to the Malachim, the angels that process that energy from Atzilus and distribute it and deliver it. Why? Because remember, in the interface, we don't just want a relationship with God and on terms that are completely divine. We want God engaging with us as well on our terms. So we want everything. We want the Etzem as it is on God's terms, that's beyond Hispaalus. We want our experience, which is completely Hispaalus, affected by relationships we have with each other. And then there's the divine as it manifests in Mamala Kalalman, in Atzilus, in the spheres, that the divine also, Kavyachal, so to speak, is also engaging with us. So we have both aspects. The root of it is beyond that so-called Hispaalus. In Atzilus, there is Hispaalus, which will explain what means Ata Yigdal No Koyachadnai. We'll explain the idea that by Matan Torah, there's a chasana between husband and wife. They affect each other. Remember, it said, Lachme le'ishay, we feed and we sustain godliness. You spoke earlier. So how do you explain all of that? Because in Atzilus, there is Hispaalus. Not Hispaalus like by human beings due to our so-called, he called weakness before, due to our lack, but Hispaalus because God wants to engage as well. Meaning engage where he feels our pain and has pain for it, and he feels our joy and has joy from it. So he says, so in Atzilus there is Hispaalus. So it's interesting. It's a Hispaalus, however, not the human form, but it is in that world where God experiences what we experience on a godly level. That's essentially what he's saying here. Which is fascinating because it's talking about, therefore, we have God on both levels, where he's beyond and where he engages. So he says like this, Hispaalus. Okay, this needs explanation. What does that mean exactly, that line? So the Chesed in Atzilus means shemispol b'bchinas hagili. He doesn't say mibchinas hagili. Shemispol b'bchinas hagili. that is mispal, meaning that there's an actual engagement. He's involved, not aloof and not detached, not just a potential faculty, not just like something completely removed and just God's ability, but in some way mispal b'bchinas hagilui. Let's read it on and I'll explain. Gevurah hu shemispal b'bchinas Tzimtzum. So I would translate mispal b'chinas hagilui means the gilui is negated to him. The gilui before the tzimtzum, it's not negated to him. It's just the ability he has and he wants it. And that's it. But remember, he wants to engage with us. So comes a point where it's negated to him, that it's really cares and he's involved and immersed in it, not so-called aloof and beyond it. So he's mispal either b'chinas hagilui, in a state of gilui, or b'chinas hatzimtzum. So before the tzimtzum, you would say tzimtzum is simply God's power to conceal. And you can't say that God's defined by it in any way. After the tzimtzum and Atzilus, you also can't say that etzem is defined, but there's a part of Elikus that is now engaging with it. So there's the way that God looks at us from a bird's eye view, and there's the God that's immersed within our activities, engaged with our concerns, and so on. Okay. Before I continue, let me stop here if anybody wants to ask. Because Rachamim, interestingly, this is again very short and brief and needs a lot to unpack. I'm going to go slowly here. So that's what he just said about Atzilus. So Atzilus, in a way, is that platform, a place where you suddenly have two things at once. Not suddenly. You have two things going on at once. There are Midos that are engaging and Hispaalus. It's still divine. It's not quite like Bri Yitzir Asiya, which we'll soon learn about, is when it comes into our world and our reality, and that's where the Malachim will come into play. On the other hand, it's not like it is higher than Atzilus. We're there, as he said, is purely Atzmim, in a state of completely removed and detached as God's capacities. So capacities have now entered our domain. And that's a very fascinating level because it is a paradox ultimately. So if anybody wants to ask anything, I'll stop here, and then he's going to interestingly explain Rachamim and add some new points in this whole concept that we're discussing. Any questions?
Yeah, I do. We've been talking from before about the higher levels before the Tzimtzum, all the ways up to Yecholis and or Ein Sof, Etzem, or all these levels. If these Midos of above before Tzimtzum are Rak Asmi, I can't have these Hispaalus. I can't interact with them, so to speak. I can't arouse them, and I can't have a relationship with them. So why would we even go there? I mean, I want a relationship. I want to love God. If I can only love him to the level of Atzilus, where he's affected by it, and beyond that, there's no true interaction, Midos interaction between giving and receiving from God.
I hear your question. One thing I have to give you credit for, you're very consistent. There's always the questions, what's in it for me? I got it. So that would be the equivalent of saying that I only have a relationship with my spouse in the areas that I can relate to. What's wrong with embracing the other, in a way, embracing their mystique? The idea that God is beyond us is also a relationship. As a matter of fact, it's a deeper relationship because you're recognizing not everything you're going to benefit from. The mere fact that a person loves God says, I don't just love the God that I relate to, I also love and engages with me. I also love the God that's beyond me. That's the real ultimate. When God says you cannot see me and live, so that requires a bittul. I remember there was a bacher, an older bacher in yeshiva, and he was like, he was a Talmud Chacham, a scholar. He was like, he wanted to have all the shleimus. So he went to Bryn Mawr to learn by Rab Nissen. He wanted to learn how to daven. He knew how to learn. He wanted to learn how to daven. When he came back from there after a year or two, I asked him, so, did you learn how to daven? He said to me, yeah, but it wasn't as geschmack. It wasn't as pleasurable as he thought it would be. So I said, maybe the whole point is that it's not pleasurable. So he said, but even non-pleasure needs some pleasure. So like the example they give, this guy that went on a weekend, they used to call the Iron John weekends. Men, to get in touch with their masculinity, they pay thousands of dollars, they go to this weekend where they wear skins and they grunt and they sweat, to get back to that the man in them. And one big executive went to one of these places, came back and was raving about it. He ran a construction company. So one of his workers says to him, boss, if you want to sweat, you don't have to pay anything. Come down to the construction site and work with us, you'll sweat. So the boss says to him, I don't have time to do that. Then I'm in my office. Over weekend, I can schedule a weekend. So he said, boss, if you sweat when you want to sweat, it's not sweating. So in other words, the very relationship with Hashem is one, there are things like we spoke about, Pave Li, God is good for me, which is a great achievement. Instead of being a selfish person, you now recognize that all your gifts and your blessings and life and parnasa are coming from Hashem. But it's still because Hashem gave me life. Then there comes a level where we learn that God is good, not because it's good for you, because God be'etzem, emes, it's lishma. You're coming to a relationship you want to have with God on God's terms. And then you really want to know how God is not engaged with us. You want to know about a God that is beyond us. That same God chose to engage with us. So essentially, when you climb the ladder in Avodas Hashem, first you begin like a child. You give me a reward for learning Torah, so I do it shalei lishma, I do it for the reward. But then you come to realize, like Avram came to realize, Eses ha'emes mipnei shu emes, he's doing truth because it's true. And I want a relationship with truth, not on my terms. So I want to relate to God as he does not engage with me. And God said, I'm revealing that part as well to you. That's why Chesed teaches us about lifnei Tzimtzum. So to understand how God is beyond us is actually, I would say, even a deeper relationship, because then you're understanding God on God's terms, not just on our terms. That's how I would put it. That's why you have Avodah al pi tam v'das, like b'chol avavcha. Then you have Avodah l'mayla mitam v'das. If it was only purely us, it would only be in our terms, on our containers. The idea of amunah, the idea of betachim, the idea of mesiras nefesh. These are all where a person, b'chol meidecha, b'chol nafshcha, b'chol meidecha, is going out of themselves to experience and being absorbed by something greater than themselves. Now, it could have been that God would have said, you can only relate to me as I engage with you. Where can you relate to me? In my chokhmah, in my bina, in my das, in my chesed, in my gevurah. But in what areas that are beyond that, I'm not going to give you any access. But the Torah says no. Chesed says no. Chesed says I'm giving you access even to my engine room, even to the way I process things before you existed, before I even relate to the way you exist, which is before the Tzimtzum, all the levels that we're talking about. That's how I would frame it.
I have a question. It's a very
Does
subtle
that answer your
one. It's
question,
very nuanced.
Eliezer?
Well,
Not geschmack, still you want some geschmack, right?
no, can you hear me?
Is it
I
echo?
I want to object to your framing it as that. What's in it for me? All the time. It really, quite honestly, truthfully, I really want to give my love to God. I want to give my love. It's not what God can love, how he can love me. I want to give my love to God. And when you were explaining that you could understand the mystique of what's beyond and beyond, we're not talking about seichel here. We're talking about midos, a relationship, an emotional relationship. I want to give my love to God. And if I can't love God beyond the tzimtzum, so why am I learning about it?
You could, but you have to surrender. You have to give up even that desire that you just said. That even the want and desire has to be given up. You just have to let go and be absorbed in something total bittul. You may not, I'm not saying you. A person may not be, listen, 1 second. You can't reach Yechudei Elah and Bittul HaMetzias if you don't have Bittul HaYesh. A person may not be ready for that. I accept that. But the fact is, ultimately, Chassidus is saying there is that about. When the Alter Rebbe said, Mili b'shamayim ki'im chalei chafatzti, said, I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Elma, I want you alone. You know anyone on that level? I don't know anyone on that level. Only the Alter Rebbe said that. And yet the Rebbe tells us, we're told this because that's the ultimate goal. So I'm not saying you and I are ready for that. But Chassidus is telling us everything. They're telling us the whole picture. And ultimately, if every one of us can find somewhere where the complete surrender is when you don't, even your desire doesn't matter. If you really want to love God like that, God says, you can't see me and live. And as the Rebbe explains, by not looking, it'll emerge. So sometimes we have to give up on the desire as well and just let go, be Kabbalah sell what God wants, and you may be absorbed. Simply, it will emerge. You don't have to make an effort. Just let everything go. Like the Kotzker Rebbe says, where is God? Wherever you let him in. Let everything go. This is all levels of Avodah, how much we're ready to let go. That's all I'm saying. I'm not talking about you per se, by the way. I meant to say the concept. And ultimately, that's why we learn about before the Tzimtzum, because we're learning about a reality that's completely on God's terms. Now, it's fair to say, I'm not there. No problem. But Chassidus wants us to be there and is teaching us that there is that ability and that you could get there.
I thought we're learning right now that beyond above the higher than the Tzimtzum, there's not even that opportunity. Even if we are not there, even if we could be at that level, God only has Yecholis there. He doesn't have a Midos that interacts.
And you can lose yourself if you lose your identity and ego. And after you've reached all the levels of Asiya, Yitzira, Bria, Atzilus, higher than Atzilus, and you've climbed properly, then what happens is you become absorbed in the Achelas Ha'atzmus. How about that?
And that's an emotional relationship at that level?
No, maybe it's not an emotional relationship. Who says it has to be an emotional relationship?
Because I saw B'chol Labavcha. We want to do it with our heart.
So then you're not on that level. So then you're in a level where it's still on your terms. It depends where you want, where your level is.
You mean at the highest level, there's no love?
Why should there? Who says even the word love means anything?
No, because at that level, love means that yesh mishu.
Are you talking here mathematical? You want to
No.
know the technical answer?
No.
If you were there, you would never ask that question. When you're absorbed in something, you don't even talk about it. You're just part of it. It's part of a reality. You don't have to talk about it. Fish in water is just a fish in water. I mean, if you really want to understand this, you have to understand total absorption, where you're talking about it right now like a journalist discussing a level. It doesn't work that way. When you're on that level, there's no discussions. You're either it or you're not it. Anyway, I don't know what more I can say.
All right, thank
you. If the Rebbeim were
let me put it this way: if
they still spoke,
I would focus on working. I would focus on working what you're capable of, working what you can relate to. Do that well, and then you'll be ready to climb to the next level. You can't force your way into Lifnei Tzimtzum. There's no way. You just can't. Just like a 2-year-old cannot suddenly become an 80-year-old. As much as they read about it and know about it, it doesn't work that way. You have to go through the steps. And everybody can find elements in their avodah of all these levels, including Lifnei Tzimtzum. But you have to find it in a way that works for you. Go ahead. So a few other questions?
I just wanted to I didn't understand what you were saying, because the Rebbeim were, I guess, I don't know what level, but they were certainly on a high level that you were speaking about a minute ago, and yet they came and discussed these levels. I thought you were mentioning that once you're at that level, you can't even discuss it, but yet they discussed it.
Well, maybe when they're discussing it, they're coming down to our level to tell us.
In other words, they're not always there. It's just certain times, I guess. Okay.
Well, that's in the general. When a Rebbe speaks to his Chassidim, he's coming to explain to them things that are of higher experiences. I think everybody can experience this to some extent. I mean, relatively speaking, compare yourself on the high point that you have in your life on Yom Kippur to a regular Shabbos or Yom Tov. Explain the difference between the two levels of your spiritual experience. And you start beginning to see there are different levels in our experience. But you have to remember, we are pretty much to be not to in any way belittle us, but we are pretty much on a very juvenile level when it comes to this stuff. The fact that we're talking before the Tzimtzum, let's not jump the gun and say, oh, you know what, since we're being told we're there. The Rebbe Rashab is giving us a gift, as Chassidus is telling us about the highest levels. But as I always say, work on Asiyah Ruchnius, work on going from where you are right now, today, this Thursday morning, and go up a little, move the needle on your level. That's all that's asked of you. We're not asked to jump to all these levels. The point is, all these levels, subtly, you can find in your own Aveda. Just like every day when we daven, we know the 4 stages in davening, the 4 rungs of the ladder, Asiyah, Yetzirah, Bria, Atzilus, which is so I would suggest try to find ways that you can do that on your terms. As I've said many, many times, the only way to really appreciate this is through Aveda. Right now, reading an operator's manual, reading a manual, a complex schematics manual is not going to make you someone that masters it. You're reading the book. The next step is activating it, actualizing it. And that comes down to Aveda. So we have to separate between the two.
I had a question, if it's still okay.
Sure.
I'm still caught up with this Lo Shanisi, that God doesn't change in the midst of him engaging with us, even at the level of Atzilus, this is Hispaalus. And I'm trying to reconcile that, and also, and maybe you can't speak about it in human terms.
Well, we're literally in the middle of a sentence about all this. So why don't we finish the subject and then we'll discuss it? We're I just started the first sentence about Hispaalus and Atzilus, and let's see how he develops it, and then we'll go through it.
All right. I'll suspend my question until later. I'm probably still going to have the question, but please.
Well, let's see how he explains the whole subject. He's in the middle of it right now.
Okay, thank you.
What he says so far is that Lamaila, there's no Hispaalus and no Shinisi because it's Atzmim. And now he's saying the Midos in Atzilus there is Hispaalus that we just learned. So to continue on, so he spoke about Chesed and Gevurah, the Hispaalus that's connected to Gilui and to Tzimtzum. So you could have, basically, like we talked about, you could be completely detached and removed, and God has the capacity to radiate, the capacity not to radiate. But then comes the Tzimtzum, it comes the manifestation, then comes Mamala Kalalman, the Kav, into Atzilus, and now Atzilus, God is engaging, he's involved in the process of Gilui, and involved in the process of Tzimtzum. Whereas before the Tzimtzum, there's no involvement as in engaging in it. So here he's relating to it. Like when we say in Torah Vayera, one of the fundamental foundational discourses on this topic. She says, Erdana. God says, let us descend below. We're hearing the cries from Zdoim, the pain, the suffering. So he said, what is this descending? And he explains that's the whole idea of Atzilus. Atzilus is God descending into existence and planting his attributes there that we should engage with Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, engage with existence. It's still divine, but it's a divine engagement, involvement here. Whereas before Atzilus, it's all part of the divine reality, divine seamless unity. The potential is there. Everything is rooted there. But like the difference between the artist who's already says, I want to create art and I'm creating art, I'm engaging with my art, and the artist as he is on his own, envisioning that one day he'll create art. Very different states. And both are necessary. One is God, so to speak, in his own domain, and one is God as he's engaging and actually creating art and beginning with Atzilus. So both are necessary and both are part of the process. So now he's talking about Atzilus, where the engagement is taking place. So he spoke about Chesed and Gevurah as the engagement with Gilui, the involvement with Gilui, the involvement with Tzimtzum. Now he's going to talk about Rachamim, Tiferes. Rachamim, which is rooted in Rachamim Atzmim, remember. Kel Mole Rachamim, as it is in the source. Now in Atzilus, what is Rachamim? He says, Rachamim hu liyes Hispaalus b'chinas hagilui v'hatzimtzum. Okay. So Rachamim, Tiferes joins, fuses Chesed and Gevurah, Gilui and Tzimtzum. So let's explain what that means. Take a teacher. So we know the classic example of a Tzimtzum and Gilui is the teacher. A brilliant teacher in his infinite brilliance, if it was completely revealed, it would be completely overwhelming. No one else could understand. No one can be in that space. The teacher within himself has the power to teach, to reveal his ideas. He has the power to restrain and refrain and discipline himself and not reveal. He also has the power to reveal and conceal. By using Gilui and Tzimtzum, a mix of the two, he reveals partially. It's like spoon feeding. So there's both elements. The teacher could just reveal and just say, speak, speak, speak. He could also be silent. Good communication is going to be a combination of both. A good speaker, a good teacher, a good writer is going to reveal. If he doesn't say anything, there's no communication, there's no revelation. If he says everything, it'll be too overwhelming. So he knows how to measure and mix the two together. So in his capacity, so to speak, before the Tzimtzum, in his capacity, he has the ability to do all of that. Even in his sleep, he has that ability. It's a ability that he has within himself. When he actualizes it, you suddenly see it coming into reality. You suddenly see the teacher is speaking. He's saying Aleph, Beis, Gimel, point 1, point 2. He's explaining it. And if you study it, you'll see there's a revelation going on. There's also a certain restraint because he's measuring his words and his ideas according to the containers of the recipient. So there's the capacity to do all of this. That's before Atzilus. In Atzilus, Gilui, the actual Gilui would be engaging when he's speaking, what he's revealing. Tzimtzum is what he's concealing and or disciplining or channeling. And Tiferes is the combination of the Tzimtzum and the Gilui together, where he's doing both together. Hispaalus b'chinas hagilui v'hatzimtzum. So there's God's potential Tiferes, and there's the actual Tiferes. That's what he saw as Rachamim, which indeed is what it says in other places is Chesed says, do kindness, reveal. Gevurah says the person may not deserve it, so conceal and withhold, or restrain or refrain. And Tiferes says, no, even if he doesn't deserve, show compassion. It mixes, it listens to Chesed and to Gevurah and introduces a third dimension. Like we say many times, Tiferes is Kav HaMtzoi, HaMachriya. Like we say, the Kosav Ashlishi, the third verse, the Machriya ben Shnei Aksuvim, Machishim Zezev, Kosav Ashlishi, Machriya beineim. It reconciles. But that's not so much the discussion here. Here the point is that Rachamim is a fusion, is a harmony between Chesed and Gevurah, between Gilui and Tzimtzum. That's Rachamim in Atzilus. Gam Yesh Leimer, in the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab now adds, he's going to explain another way of understanding Chesed, Gevurah, and Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferes in Atzilus. And then after this, he's going to go back and explain that it's Hispaalus, it's engagement, it's involvement, but it's not Hispaalus like it is in Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah, which is Hispaalus from each other, where we affect each other. Here, he's engaging, he's involving himself, and we'll soon learn that. Let's first do the parentheses. Gam Yesh Leimer can also say the Chesed in Atzilus, hu b'chinas habitl v'hayichud v'hakavona el yeino b'chinas hagilui. The Chesed refers to the level of bitl v'yichud, where you become sublimated, nullified, and united in the higher purpose, kavona el yeino b'chinas hagilui. So Chesed in Biyah, in the focus there is actual kindness, actual Gilui. But what's the kavana within the Gilui? Why did God reveal himself? Why is the teacher revealing? because he wants you to be connected with him. So he says, so Chesed is focusing on the bittul the yuchad ba'kavon yod b'chinas hagili. Why God in the first place? So you could, like I mentioned yesterday, you could focus on asher kedishanu b'mitzvayse b'tzivonu. That's God's intention in the mitzvah. Or you can focus on alachilas matzah or atifas talis, where you're focusing on the actual mitzvah, the doing of the mitzvah and how you do the mitzvah, which is also God's will. That's his will. But are you focusing on the detail or you're focusing on the kavon elyon? When you build a mishkan, you could be focusing like Bitzalel, focused on the details. Now we have to build an aron, an ark. Now we have to build a menorah, a mizbeach, a shulchan. Now we have to build the walls. Moshe focused on the kavanah in the Mishkan. What's the kavanah? V'shachanti b'seicham. The entire purpose of it. As a matter of fact, that's why it says that Moshe focused on the kalim first, then on the walls. Bitzalel, like a good architect, you first build the walls, then the kalim. But the point being is, you could focus. I'll give another example. The pasuk in Bahar, it begins Kisivoyu ala oretz, where we'll come to the land, the mitzvah of Shemitah. So it says V'shav sa'oretz Shabbos l'Hashem. When you come to the land, you will rest the land Shabbos to Hashem. Then it says Sheish shanim tizra sadecha. 6 years you shall plant, sow. B'tizmar es kamecha, and you shall plant sow your vineyards. And then b'shan hashvi, the 7th year, Shabbos l'Hashem. You should rest the land at Shabbos. Ask the Alter Rebbe, why the redundancy? So when you come to the land, it says V'shavsa, then it says 6 years, and then the 7th year. Shabbos comes after the 6 years. So why did we begin with V'shavsa? First, they have to plant the seed. Before you rest the land, you have to do something. First 6 days of the week, you work, and then comes Shabbos. So the Alter Rebbe says, because the pasuk begins with the kavanah. The purpose of your planting the land from day one, from minute one, from year one, has to be Shabbos. So it starts with the kavanah. Then, in actuality, there's year 1, year 2, year 3, 6 years, and then comes the 7th year. Like it says about Shammai, that on Sunday he's already putting away the best food for Shabbos. Thinking about Shabbos right away. Zocher Shema Shabbos is not just on Shabbos, it's all week long. Thinking about the kavanah. Hillel, it says, was thinking about actualizing the dir b'tachtenim. Sunday, you have to do the Aved of Sunday. Monday. It speaks about this in Chesed. So what he's saying is, Chesed is saying, is Chesed Atzilus, is you're focusing not on the function of Chesed, but on the Kavan El Yena and Gili. What is the purpose of Gili? God's power to reveal. So the power to reveal is before the Tzimtzum all the way up to the source. In Atzilus, it's already an actual revelation, Chesed, a real midah. But what is that? What is it? It's a combination of two elements. It's the real revelation, but it's the kavanah, the revelation, as opposed to the actual mechanics of the revelation. That's what he's saying here. Gevurah, and what is Gevurah in Atzilus? So it's not just God's power to reveal and God's power to conceal. It's the kavanah, the bitl v'yichud, our bitl and yichud. Like you spoke earlier about Hamayrik be'echad, the bitl that we have, where we're sublimating ourselves and nullifying ourselves and connecting with what? With God's kavanah in Tzimtzum, in the Helam. And Tiferes. What's Tiferes and Atzilus? Tiferes who are bitl v'yichud be'yichud beis hamadreges. So it's not just the concept of the harmony between the two, Gili and Helam. It's the bitl and yichud, our avodah, in being absorbed in the yichud of the two levels, the kavanah sagilui, huayedei tzimtzum, because the intention of the gilui is revealed through the tzimtzum. Why is the teacher revealed?
My friend, maybe it's too dangerous to do it on this thing. Maybe you should just pull around.
So kavanah sagilui, huayedei tzimtzum, the intention of the gilui, like we learned earlier in volume 2, that the intention of the gilui is to come through the tzimtzum. The kavanah sat tzimtzum hu gilui, and the purpose of the tzimtzum is not concealment; it's in order to reveal. The revelation we learned the whole reason of the revelation is to go through the tzimtzum and reach us, And the reason of the Tzimtzum is in order to bring the Gili to us. U'kamoshon is bar le'il, like we learned earlier, this was at length in volume 2. He mentioned it before as well. If you look on page, I believe on page 1424, he also said it, I think. Let me see. Yeah. Yeah. On the end of the paragraph on 1424. So that's what Tiferes is. So Tiferes is not just, as I said, the parentheses actually adds that you're focusing on the divine kavana, the kavana el-yena, and being absorbed in it in Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferes. This parentheses can use a lot of explanation, but that's the brief points. I will definitely elaborate more on it in the next class. But it's a very interesting parentheses.
Can you add Malchus to the whole stew? Like today, I'm just thinking about Malchus Shabbat Tiferes. Is it?
What are you saying?
Can you add Malchus to the whole thing? Because I'm thinking about today, Malchus Shabbat Tiferes.
I'm sure you can, but
Today's my Yom Haledet, so I'm thinking about it more.
Oh, happy birthday! Happy birthday!
I put you in Ruchnis and Yashmis to everybody in this year.
Thank you. Amen. You should have a shnas
Amen.
hatzlacha, much success, many
Happy
healthy long
birthday.
years together with
Shine
your wife, nachas from your children and grandchildren,
Amen.
Amen.
great grandchildren.
You should
Mazel tov, Tzvi.
have all the good things. Happy
Amen.
birthday. Happy birthday.
Tiferes Sheba Malchus. Malchus Sheba Tiferes, sorry. Malchus Sheba Tiferes. Okay, so this works. Combination of all the levels. Yeah. Malchus Sheba Tiferes. You use the Omer app that we made for my book, the Omer.
I didn't use it this year, but the Rebbe spoke about Malchus Shabbat Tiferes a lot, learning about
about Mashiach, yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop here. And he's now going to explain the next section. He's going to explain Omnam Hispaalus Zeis Einem in Anivroim. It's Hispaalus, but it's not from Nivroim. So you're going to find now an in-between. It's not beyond Hispaalus, like higher levels, but it's also not the Hispaalus as it is by humans. It's a Hispaalus that's not from the Nivroim. And that's what we're going to understand what Atzilus is. This, again, this in-between place. This is very, turning into a very fascinating piece. The whole understanding of the interface. Very, very fascinating. Very fascinating. Okay. So we'll stop here. We'll stop after the parentheses in a little close to half down, a little before half down the page on page 1428. Any further questions, points for clarification? No? Okay.